Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by mum and daughter, Anne and Amanda. And welcome to the show. Great
Thank
to
you.
have you on.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's special because we're recording this the day after Thanksgiving, and yesterday I released. Yesterday was the first time that Cynthia, Suzanne, who are daughter and birth mother, were spending their first Thanksgiving, with the other mum as well, Cynthia's mum. And I released that podcast yesterday on day after. And today we're recording a podcast with a mum, an adoptive mum, and her daughter. So it's like a really special thing. I'm really enjoying it. I love being stretched by the different formats. So I'm really looking forward to getting into this.
We are too. It's great around Thanksgiving because we just all shared how thankful we are for each other.
Yeah.
And so now we get to share it on here, which is great.
Yeah. Okay. So Anne and what another thing that makes Anne and Amanda very special is they've actually worked on a book together, and it's called Silent Embrace. So can I ask why did that where did that title come from, Silent Embrace?
Well, we had been working on this collection of essays for a variety of reasons. I had placed a child myself when I turned 22, and being now an adult adoptee with a birth mother perspective, I felt that I didn't have a lot of resources to go to know how to feel as a birth mom. And over the years, our family has been very open about adoption. My mom has done a lot of advocacy and writing about adoption. And so it was never something that we ever felt ashamed of, at least in my perspective of the 4 kids. I would venture to say that my siblings would feel very much the same way. But my mom has always been really, well, she's a wonderful writer, but she's also been very good about collaborating and thinking and talking about ideas. And so when we were talking about it, she said, well, let's do something about it. And so we went through the process, my mom more than I did, because she had more experience in vetting authors and finding people to be a part of the project. She found a publisher that was interested in helping us, and we started the project, and we didn't have a name for a while. I think we had a couple different ones in play, didn't we, Mom? I don't remember some of them.
I don't remember any of them, but yeah, I do remember that's a good thing that I don't remember them, because it means it's a good thing we didn't use them.
Right. And I think one of the things when we were talking about it is, from our family's perspective, at least in my experience, I've always felt that I've had this embrace of both of my families, my adoptive family, who is my family that I'm with and raised me, and then my biological family. I feel like the way that my parents always addressed it was that those were people who loved us and wanted to be a part of our lives, but it just wasn't the right time for them, or circumstances didn't allow it. It was never looked as a negative thing. And so I think because of the dialogue my parents had with us, it always felt like my birth family was embracing us. It just wasn't at the forefront. It was more of a silent embrace, and that birth mothers are always there, or birth fathers, but birth mothers have a different connection in the fact that they are carrying the child for 9 months and then physically go through that sort of separation. And I think we just kind of felt that it worked. And then we had the artwork that came along with it, and it felt like it was a really suitable name and title for what we feel adoption captures.
Yeah. It's beautiful. I was telling Amanda before we recorded about, I guess I'm going to call it a silent embrace as well, because it was a letter that I found in my adoption file to the social worker who facilitated the adoption. And as I read the letter from my birth mother, I felt a silent embrace from her. I actually felt I was part of her. So it's a very surreal experience, because she'd written this letter 48 years before I wrote it. She'd written this letter 40 years before I read it. She never intended it. For me, it was written to the social worker. She had no idea it would ever end up in my hands. She died probably 10 years before more than that. Something like 20 years before I read the letter, and I felt as one. So it was like there was no separation between me and her, and that, when there's no separation between us, that's love. Love is the absence of difference, the absence of separation between two people. So I think I think Anne's spot on right. It was the right name, as it makes perfect sense to me, emotionally as well as logically. It makes sense in my heart as well as my head. So what did you learn? What did you learn about yourselves during this process of working on the essays for the book?
I think working with Amanda, first of all, was an incredible experience to be able to put this together with the idea that this is a book to help. I think our goal was to help birth mothers, and to let them know that there were families out there that might be seeking them, and that it's okay to seek, and to see what kind of a relationship might form. We didn't get as many birth mothers as we did adoptees who were searching, and we got a couple of adoptive moms. I think we've got 2 birth mother stories, and then Amanda's would be the third. But what I learned about myself, I think that's when I realized that being as completely open as possible when it comes to birth and adoption is going to extend my family in incredible ways. It's a real gift. It's been a huge gift to me. I'm thrilled to be included on the journeys that my daughters who have opened their adoptions have taken. I'm thrilled to be a part of Amanda's birth daughter's life, and I feel like we borrow her mom and dad as additional children of our own. I feel like it's opened my life up in incredible ways. I'm really, really fortunate.
And I think, Simon, you said that, you know, at the foundation of it all is that love. And I think our hope was to really highlight the fact that adoption is a thing of love, and that especially when I was going through my pregnancy with my oldest, my birth daughter, there was still, and still is, a lot of stigma around being a birth mom. And I think one of the things that I was hoping that this book would do, and I think it actually worked more for the maybe adoptive community than the birth mom community, is to open your eyes to the fact that not all birth moms are the way that they're maybe portrayed in movies and film and books, and that it can happen in all sorts of circumstances and all sorts of demographics. It's not one certain type of person, because I can share that I was probably the least likely person out of lots of people that would have, you know, people would not have expected that to be my situation. And it was not an easy process to try to always sort of guard myself with knowing that people were going to judge me because I was unwed and pregnant. People were going to judge me because they didn't know my situation with the birth father and the reasons behind the adoption. And that's already hard enough to go through, even if you're keeping your child. But then having this extra layer of now I'm also knowing that I'm placing this baby that I love. I'm 22 years old. I could raise her, but I knew it wasn't what was best for her. And so I think I hit this point where I was like, how do we get people to understand that it's not because I was being wild and out of control and I had no direction in my life. And finding some of our family members through adoption also just sort of backs that up. That the people, like the birth family that we have found for my sister and I, were not directionless or people who had no goals or ambitions. It was a circumstance. And I think we had more adoptive parents kind of open their eyes to that a little bit more and maybe give more grace where it hasn't been in the past, or at least that's my hope, is that that's provided the opportunity for that.
Yeah. That's
I
beautiful.
talk a lot, sorry.
No, that's good. That's great.
In
That's what
Silent
we want.
Embrace, I'm quickly trying to see if I can find it. Amanda talked about meeting the first time it actually probably wasn't the very first time.
It was the second time I went.
But she went to a baseball game with her birth daughter, and her birth daughter's mom was the coach. And she talked about getting to the game, and I would read it if I could find it.
I can just tell you the story if you want to.
Why don't you tell him what happened?
So
yes,
we were going up to my birth daughter. They live in a state very close to us, and so I went up. We had an open relationship. I hadn't seen her in person for a while. They took some time. They always sent pictures, but when she turned 7, we started to see each other on a yearly basis, if not more. And so probably the second or third time, probably about 8 or 9, I went up to see them, and her mom, like my mom was saying, was taking us to this baseball game that my birth daughter was in. And I was very nervous because this is the first time I'm meeting like people in public with this little girl that I birthed and her family, who's so wonderful and embracing and accepting. And we walked across the field, and my daughter Hannah, which is what I call her because that's what I named her. I'll use that name for this sake. And she said, "This is my birth mom." And she's running across this field. I had no moment to go, okay, I guess I'm introduced as this birth mom. She has no problem with it because they were very open with it. So, kind of walked through that moment and sat down with a family friend of theirs. And this family friend said, "Oh, so you're her birth mom?" And I said, "Yeah." And I'm really glad that I can be a part of this. This is really neat to watch her play softball. And she said, "So was it a one-night stand?" And I didn't even know what to, I just kind of looked at her. I was like, absolutely not. It wasn't. It was from a 3-year relationship that we were actually looking to get married, and it just was not a safe situation anymore. And so she was like, "Oh, interesting." And it was just that moment where why, first of all, that's not an appropriate question to ask anyways, but because I was a birth mom, I think she assumed that that's okay, that I was maybe somebody who had not lower on her level, but I think she thought that I was young and not thinking through things, and that it was okay to ask a question like that. And I'm sure my face, I'm a pretty expressive person. I'm sure my face spoke more than my words, because it was just very offensive. I don't think that that's appropriate.
I've got quite an open face. Did you see how I reacted to that?
Yes. So I think things like that it was a scary to me that in this time and age where adoption is much more prevalent and or maybe not more prevalent, but more spoken about, that the comfort level to ask a question like that is even there anymore, especially with family dynamics being so different without adoption being a part of it. Life is very different than it was when I was born in the 70s.
It's God gobsmacking that.
Yes.
Like, I'm going to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but I'll come back up, right? So before I came into the adoption space, I did a lot of work in what we call primary, what you call elementary schools. And somebody that my wife worked with, she got a couple of kids, and she told her kids' head teacher, principal in your term, about what I did, and they asked me to come in and do some work with their kids, and I but they didn't tell me. They didn't want to. It's strange. They didn't want to tell me any background. I had to ask them what they wanted. They just, and I want to know what you want. I can twist. Yeah. Because you've asked me in. So what is it? And they said, we just want the kids to be nicer to each other in the playground, especially the girls. And we're talking, these kids were 8, so they're the same age as Hannah at the time, and it's just like, I don't know. I don't know whether it's I'm mass simplification. I don't know whether, because me and my wife haven't had any kids, so we've never had that kind of shaming or judgment or questions like, is this a parent thing? Is this an American thing? Is this a female thing where you kind of like where blokes wouldn't say anything? When I was a kid, you didn't say anything to anybody else. You just, in the playground. We never had playground supervisors when I was a kid. We'd be fighting. We would be fighting in the playground, and that's that's the way that the men get, the boys sort stuff out. So yeah, it's a bit of a side thing, but like, how would you dare? It's just like, it's what gives you the right and the assumption and the just like total utter disrespect.
Yeah. I worry, and that's part of the reason I've written so much about it. There was nothing really for my kids, which is why I wrote my first book, Real for Sure Sister. It was actually, I was writing short stories to tell my kids about their adoptions so they understood them, because I saw that adoption can be weaponized by children, and even into adulthood. And, I remember Amanda coming home from school after a little girl told her, "You don't have a mother," when they were teasing each other. And the little girl, Amanda said, "If you don't knock it off, I'll tell my mother." And she said, "Well, you don't have a mother because I'm an adoptive mom. Amanda is adopted." And I remember talking to her about that and saying, "Well, actually, you've got a birth mom and you have an adoptive mom, and I'm here to protect you just like any other mother, and I'm very real."
She's really good at protecting too.
Oh, I am.
Yeah.
The kids tell me that I think I'm a big dog, but yeah, I don't tolerate cruelty. And it's interesting, Amanda became a 5th grade teacher, which is about the age she was when that little girl said that to her. And Amanda worries a lot about bullying and takes it into her classroom. Doesn't take bullying into her classroom, takes the worry about bullying into her classroom, and really works with her kids so that they're not bullying each other or being cruel. But I do think everything I've written has been in the idea of trying to help everybody understand that adoption is family, just a little bit more complicated. There are more people in it, and there are more people to love. That's what it really means. Even if you don't know who they are, you can love them for what they've given you.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things you had asked what were some of the insights or what we learned from the book process. Another thing I guess I would say is the amount of emotion that adoptive parents feel. My mom being my mom protected us with some of, or guarded us from some of maybe her more raw emotions around our adoptions. And so reading her essay actually helped me understand just how much she and my dad housed and dealt with as adoptive parents, and feeling a variety of feelings towards, things being unfair for us, or at one point when I had searched for some of my biological family and was not getting responses that were necessarily the kindest, knowing that they also felt that. And so, and now myself being a parent, I understand a little bit better. In the thick of raising, I have a 6 and an 8-year-old. My birth daughter is 22 and living her life out in the world. So, but it is one of those things that I guess I never realized how complex it was from the adoptive parent standpoint. So some of those essays that I read helped me have a little more empathy and grace toward, I don't feel like we had too many of the situations where we were like, well, you don't understand, mom, you're not adopted. I don't feel like that happened too often. I'm sure it did, but
I don't
think
remember it.
I don't think that was something, I know that has happened in families with adoption, but I guess I didn't realize that. And I don't know that I've ever vocalized that to you, but how much you go through emotionally as an adoptive parent as well. So I think, it just sort of tends to breed this feeling of empathy all around for all roles, no matter if you're the adoptive parent, you're maybe not even a parent, but a family member. I know, like our grandparents, it was a different, I know they had at one point, one set of grandparents was looking to adopt before they had my dad. And so I think knowing that it was even at that time something that was part of our family culture, I guess, and just having empathy for all the different roles involved, because you don't know anybody else's story if you're not living it. You only know your own.
I think grace is sounds like a really lovely thing. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, well, Simon, maybe like, what if I could have some more grace? I had a big grace breakdown last year with the builder. So I'm sitting in an extension now that was built on, an addition built on the side of it now. And this builder was a very different operative to me. He's like very different. And I completely ran out of all grace, and I couldn't speak to the guy. I was that furious. He didn't operate his business like I like to run my thing. So grace sounds like a really good thing that we should have. And as soon as I was thinking about that, I thought, what about, well, the first thought is like, what does grace mean to you? Because it's not just, we're talking of adoption here, not about Simon's building contractors. But what does grace mean to you guys?
I think we're looking at each other. Grace to me means that you can experience empathy and learn to understand through empathy what others feel. It also means, at least I try, I'm not always very good at this. It also means trying not to judge someone for their circumstances in life, but also trying to give people, I don't want to give people a handout, but I do want to give them a hand up in whatever way they need. And I think that's the hand up part is definitely a response to the way I teach. I realize not all of my students are in good places all the time, and sometimes they do need that hand up. My children, I think they give me a hand up as often as I give them one. But I also think part of that is we're hearing each other very clearly. We listen. We try to listen, and we're also big talkers, though.
Yeah.
I mean, we constantly are interrupting each other, and but Grace is pausing in the middle of it to say, "I need to hear you."
And I think that's interesting because we were talking last night at our Thanksgiving celebration. Usually it was centered more on our kids not listening because they were excited to be together and cousins were running amok. So I said last night I had come across this thing that I think is something I'm trying to work on more, but that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth so that you're listening more than you're speaking. And I think really listening is not a skill that is developed. I mean, it's not something that you go to school and learn. It's a byproduct of learning because you have to listen to learn. But truly listening to somebody and hearing their experience allows you to build that grace and empathy because you're not thinking about your own internal dialogue of how it connects to you. You're just listening to someone else. And I think reading those other essays that we compiled and through ones that maybe didn't go into the book, you had to listen to their story. From that editorial standpoint, we had to listen to know if it was the narrative that would fit this collection. And I think that is a skill that we can't always build, but I've been fortunate to have the opportunity through things like that or in my own classroom to have to stop myself to just listen. And that's not societally what we do very much anymore. I think, social media platforms allow us to get up and share, but not always. We can sort of manage what responses we want to read or use to write the narrative that we put in our brain. But I think when you really listen to somebody, and I've been fortunate in my teaching career to have students who've been adopted in my rooms and had some really amazing conversation with 10 and 11-year-olds that I think were probably life-changing for those kids as much as it was for me to give some of these little kids that are sharing their adoption stories a voice, and made me go, oh, wow, like my adoption story to me is important, but hearing what these other kids are going through or hearing what they've dealt with and allowing other kids to know the truth of that is just, I think that's the epitome of grace, is just seeing it in action and how when somebody really listens, that can change the fabric of a class or a community. And it allows, I know for me, it's allowed me to try to move more, well, graciously, but with less judgment toward biological family, that I'm still learning and navigating relationships there, but also respecting some of my siblings who have chosen not to open their adoptions and understanding that that's maybe where they're at. And it's not for me to go, well, why don't you just do it? It's just to listen. And if they don't feel that they're at that point, then they don't need to be.
The thing, I had a couple of stories came to mind. You both used the word judgment. A couple of stories came to mind. If one's pretty deep, one's pretty deep and long-winded, and if you're interested in judgment, then listeners, there's an incredible book by a Holocaust survivor called Edith Eger, Eger, about judgment when she becomes a therapist, eventually becomes a therapist, and there's a neo-Nazi in her in her therapy room, and he's coming out with what the sort of things she said, that neo-Nazi said, and she has something goes off within her brain to say, where am I judging people? So she, instead of being offended at this re-traumatization, she, she looks inside. Incredibly powerful stuff. Another story that comes to mind is that American author called Wayne Dyer, who ends up he's abandoned by his father. His father abandons him and his mum and the siblings, and he ends up, by a strange set of circumstances, at his father's grave, and he is going to pee on this grave, and he rants at his dead father's grave for 2 hours, and then has a spontaneous forgiveness of his father. And he describes that as the like it becomes a weight. If you can Google the story, it's on a video on YouTube, Wayne Dyer, Father's Grave, or something like that, and he describes that as he was carrying around the weight of this resentment and judgment towards his father. That goes, that the backpack is off his back with all the bricks, and his life takes off as the judgment spontaneously disappears. So there's some incredible depth to this stuff, and I'm thinking, well, I'm back to me and my contractor, right, and how much I judged him, and that's that insight piece. The insight piece is like, well, this guy didn't do this builder didn't do what he said he was going to do, right? So instead of me pointing the finger at him, I point the finger back at me and say, okay, when don't I do what I say I'm going to do? And so instead of being a subject for Simon to rant about on a podcast, it's an invitation for me to go back inside and kind of question my own thinking, and hopefully I'll have some sort of spontaneous enlightenment experience when I'm not so easily riled by contractors, But I think for me, one of the biggest lesson that I get pretty every day, and maybe soon, maybe it'll land sometime, is like expecting others to behave like me is a complete waste of time.
It's hard though. That's hard to shake. I mean, I feel like we use the backpack analogy. The backpack, I don't know if my backpack of judgment ever totally goes away, because I think there is an innate human nature to judge, because your experience is what you experience. So you use your framework to sort of judge everything else by. But maybe my backpack isn't quite as full, or I think if you think of like this man, Wayne Dyer, who I've heard of, so I must have somehow come across him. He maybe takes that backpack off. But I know with adoption, that backpack doesn't always go off all the way, because there are moments where I do have those moments of judgment and frustration. And then I try to pull the grace back and go, okay, let's unpack the backpack a little bit and see why you're feeling that way. But it doesn't, for me personally, at least, the backpack's never completely off, because there are still moments in my story of 44 years going, but why? Like, why is this difficult for you to connect with me? Or asking questions about birth family without judgment can be really hard sometimes, because I don't know the story fully, And so I think my backpack's on, but it's not always full, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
think he's fortunate if he could just shed the backpack fully and
Well, that's the thing, right? He didn't shed the backpack. Grace lifted
Grace
it.
lifted it.
He didn't do it, or God did it, or
Yes.
somebody did it. Somebody said to me yesterday, you seem to be quite strong-willed, Simon, and I'm like, no, I'm not doing this. This is coming through me, not from me. I'm not white knuckling. The stuff she was talking about, like doing the podcast or whatever, this is coming. This is coming through me. I'm not white knuckling. This isn't a mindset thing. Grace and God and chi, life force, spirit, all that stuff is far more powerful than little Simon, for sure.
Yeah.
I think we are. No, I said we. I think right. So I was sold a story, or I believed a story that most things are once and done. It's Disney, isn't it? And they all lived happily ever after. Mm-hmm. And they all lived happily ever after. So there was never anything. Right. So everything was happy. But this sort of stuff. So I just, so I can say, right, my expectation was, I've got to this point, I've come to this healing, and that's me, once and done, right? Life doesn't work like that. It's not like learning to ride a bike, or learning that 2 + 2 is 4. Right. Once we've learned to ride a bike, we don't forget. We're like the elephant. Even elephants. Would elephants forget how to ride a bike? We're told that we think that learning is once and done, because it is in certain areas of our lives. But when it comes to the more emotional, the more essential, the more spiritual, the more whatever, it's not. The more interpersonal, it's not once and done. The backpack, like we're working each day to remove one of the bricks from the backpack, and that's the way it's supposed to be. It's not always. It's very rarely once, like for Wayne Dyer. I'm sure he's still got cheesed off. A mentor of mine said, she once saw Tony Robbins backstage completely losing it with a member of his team, and she was so pleased because it made him human to her. He thought that because he on the stage is like, yeah, nothing sticks, Mr. Teflon. That's not the truth. That's not.
I've been reading a lot and working a lot on intergenerational trauma. In part, I'm teaching a course in young adult literature, and it's a special topic, and it's on mental health and emotional growth. The novels are. And I've been bringing in a lot of information about intergenerational trauma based on one of the novels, a novel called Darius the Great is Not Okay, which is about clinical depression. And I think sometimes we don't realize that some of those bricks weren't originally ours. They were passed down, and they can be passed down 5 generations. And I think we get, and more probably, I think we get frustrated that it's not easy. And that's where we get angry, resentful. Like, why can't I just dump this all out? But some of those bricks might be really pretty stepping stones, It might be worth keeping them around, just knowing what they are. Like the knowledge of, okay, I've got a birth mother. and yeah, I know before you learned the story of the teddy bear, Simon, you talked about how you felt like she had pretty much dumped you. The teddy bear story is the one that made you realize she loved you. She wasn't dumping you. The knowledge that you've transformed is worth hanging on to and using down the road. So that's a brick that I wouldn't get rid of. And I'm seeing that a lot right now with Amanda and our daughter Stevie, who both, I mean, they're trying to navigate really complex relationships. And they're learning a lot about birth family. And they're learning some not so good stuff, some great stuff. They're learning about themselves through this, like why they have I'm not talking about Amanda here, but it may be something like why they have anxiety and depression and have panic attacks. And it's worth it to me for them to pick up that brick, take a really good look at it and say, okay, this explains things. Now I can work with it. Like now I can take this genetic piece, this clinical depression in the case of Darius, and knowing that it's genetic, I'm just going to work with it. And so when you're feeling guilty about not hanging on, about not getting rid of a brick, or you're feeling guilty about judging, I think it's okay to look at why you're doing it. I'm not sure I'm even making sense here.
Well, I think what you're saying is that utilizing those hardships or that heaviness to be reflective and to figure out the heaviness is there for a reason. And if
Yeah.
it's there for a reason, maybe it's for me to be more introspective and say, what can I do differently? Or what am I? Why am I feeling this way? And it might be something, the impetus of it all may be with you, even though the judgment is on other people. It's because something in you is feeling off. And so
Yeah.
using that information or the power of that information to help transform your own mindset. I got it, man. I'm with you.
Thanks. Good. All right.
Can I
No,
can I
'cause I
take a
mean,
go at it?
yes.
So you can either fight the emotion, try and numb the emotion, or investigate the emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
you're suggesting the latter. So getting
Yeah.
curious about it. So I'm doing an online course at the moment, and with a great lady called Claire Diamond, and that's one of her things is get curious. So most of us are trying to get rid of the emotion, and kind of it's a bit like arguing with the builder, right? It's only going to go one way. He's not going to say, yeah, I totally get your point, Simon. It's gonna escalate, right? So a lot of people will say, like it's this. We've got a civil war going on in our head, and it's not civil at all. But it's kind of like, so there's two voices in our head, and they're arguing, and it's easier. It just gets louder in there. Mm-hmm. It just gets louder in there until we wave the white flag of peace. And so what I found useful is ignoring the negative voice in my head rather than trying to still it. So most of us feel okay. I feel a negative emotion and I try and push it away instead of bringing it in close and looking at it and seeing what I can learn from it. it's like it's like a rumble strip. So I know that if I'm feeling SH1T, then I'm hitting a rumble strip. There's something going on within me that's not quite right, and so let's bring the magnifying glass out and kind of take a look at it. But it's the curiosity. If you're coming from curiosity rather than trying to get rid of the feeling, rather than trying to understand the feeling. I'm working on a book at the moment, and it's like let's try and understand what the primal wound is, rather than just putting a sticker on it, a bandage on it.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that happens a lot is I think a lot of people are motivated by fear. So it's scary to look at those emotions, because you may find out you're more flawed than you thought, and that's a scary thing. And I think that is another, I guess, and I don't know if my adoptive experiences, I would venture to say that this is what has sort of started this thought in my brain, but maybe everybody has it even if they're not adopted. But I feel like my experiences around adoption as both a birth mom and trying to know how to do that role successfully, so that I have a connection with my birth daughter and she feels that she has love from me, but in a different way than her parents. But then also as an adult adoptee who's in the process of finding family, I would say in the last year have just stopped being fearful. And I'm a very cautious person by nature. I'm an oldest child, very worried about making sure I'm doing everything by the rules. And I think over this last year, with my search with biological family, probably last 2 years, I've stopped the what ifs and the like, well, what if they don't like me? Or what if all the questions that would stop me, the negative curiosities that would hinder any progress or growth, and just saying, you know what do I have to lose? I have a family that loves me. I have parents that have been there and supportive and are encouraging this journey. Why am I not just putting it out there? And that was a big step for me, a big shift for me to be able to just trust my instincts. I think too, the pandemic sort of lifted that off a little too, because life is short and people get sick. And I think at the moment when I was reaching out to birth family, I wanted to at least put it out there, because you don't know what's going to happen. And I would rather, and I think that just sort of geared that up a little, because people were getting sick. And I didn't want to regret not chasing that curiosity at the risk of making someone else uncomfortable. That was my biggest concern, was like, well, what if me coming back into their lives would bother their family? But I didn't choose to be adopted. And I felt like I don't want anything from them except to share my love and my thanks for what they've provided me. I know that's not every adoptee's feeling, but for me, that was my feeling. And so I think trying to look at that brick as if it's a fear, to use that fear to do something instead of cave in and retreat, which I've done that too. But I think, having the encouragement of my parents and sort of their blessing. I mean, I did talk to them before I searched, just to say, I don't want you to ever feel like you're being replaced, because you never could be. You are my parents. And I wanted to make sure that they were still okay with us searching, because they've always said they were. But when it comes to the point of actually doing it, that was me going, I just don't want to make anyone upset or sad, or, and they said, go for it. Just know that we're here if it doesn't go the way you plan it. And
or even if it does go, we're
if
here.
it does. Right. And in some cases it has. I have connected with some birth family that's been very excited and are excited to meet my parents, to say, thank you for being a part of her life and being who you were for her. And again, I know not every person's situation is like ours. We've been so fortunate to have the adoption experiences we've had. But I also want to credit my family, my parents, for a lot of the groundwork that they put with the ideologies around it. They made it okay, and they made it exciting. And that's just, it's an exciting part of your life. It shouldn't be anything you're ashamed of. So
There was a metaphor that came to mind about half an hour ago. I didn't share, but I'm going to bring it back in now, actually. So this has happened at a few weddings that I've been to, and I've not been to many weddings recently, but or funerals, thankfully. You know, I'm thinking 3-4 weddings and a funeral. Anyway,
I was just thinking that.
So you know, there's that kind of sometimes there's the welcome to our family, right? So that, you know, like the father of the bride says, welcome to our family, and then, you know, father of the bridegroom says, welcome to our family. And it seems like competitive family to me. And these are usually the guys. Mass generalization, sorry for any, whatever the word is. Yeah, what am I being? I'm being prejudiced. These are the guys that are signing the check or whatever, or sending the bank transfer. It's big weddings, and they're big egos, you know. And, you know, welcome to our family. You know, I paid for this. You're here. All that, and they're obviously inflated, especially the bride. You know, they're inflated with you know, how brilliant their daughter looks, right? And they're feeling everything. So, but it's like, well, what if it was one family? You know, what if instead of one bloke saying one family, one bloke, our family, the other bloke saying our family? No, it's one big one. And the podcast that we released yesterday, it's called, you know, I think it's called Infinite Love, and I picked that phrase from Suzanne, the birth mother, Cynthia's birth mother. And yeah, because they said that one of the things that they learned was that love isn't finite. So I flipped that into hopefully a bigger, a catchier title for a podcast, Infinite Love. And that's what it's about, isn't it? And, you know, because like me loving, if I could love the builder, right? I could love the builder. What if I could love the builder? What if I could be gracious about the builder? You know, wouldn't that be great? So, yeah, I'm conscious of time. Is there anything that I've not asked you that you want to share? Or any closing thoughts, or thoughts about what I've just said, or anything?
Well, first, I think there's still time with the builder, Simon. I think you can get there.
I'm smiling about it now, and I wasn't smiling about it a year ago.
You've already made growth. No, I think it's really wonderful the work you're doing, because I think the more we can get adoption conversation out there, we just continue the work of making it not even something that's accepted, but celebrated. And that family dynamics are so unique in any way, shape, or form, that adoption should just be kind of a part of another way for family to come together. And I just hope people know that there are resources out there, and that I love sharing my experience. I'm, like my mom said, we're both talkers, so sometimes I overshare. But if it makes one person feel like they're not alone, or they have a situation that they've been in, that they can say, wow, I know somebody else who's had that situation, or I can be a resource. I know my mom has had students who've been through situations where she's connected them to me as a birth mom. I think just not being afraid, again, to use my experience to help other people. And I think my mom's always been at the forefront of that, which is probably where I get it, because she's been really very vocal in the community, and standing up for what's right with adoption, and knowing that family doesn't have to look a certain way. It's who you love, that infinite love, who you decide to share it with. So
Yeah.
Thank you. I started to write about adoption because nothing was out there. And then somebody on Sesame Street, I think Maria, adopted, and Bert and Ernie wrote their version of adoption stories. And people started to really talk a lot about adoption then. I'm grateful for everything that comes out. As I said, my writing about adoption was exploration. And I hope, based on what Amanda said, to kind of carry off that. I really hope if people are looking for answers, and if they hear this podcast and they realize the answers aren't out there, I hope you investigate it, people. I hope you ask the right questions, all of the questions, because there are no wrong questions, and then write down your answers and share them with the next person who comes along.
Yeah.
Because that's what's going to make this world family so much better and bigger and loving and empathetic.
Yeah. So as always, listeners, check out the show notes for links to the books on Amazon and the social channels and stuff like that. And thank you very much, Anne and Amanda. It's been beautiful.
Thank
you, Simon.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, listeners, and we'll speak to you very soon. Bye-bye.